This video reviews Section C of the 2022 Election Administration and Voting Survey, or EAVS. This section seeks to understand mail voting in the 2022 general election. You can find similar presentations for the other 5 sections of the survey on the EAVS portal and the Election Assistant Commission website. As you watch this video, you might want to follow along with the PDF version of the survey, which can be found on the Downloads page of the EAVS portal. Section C of EAVS asks you to report data about mail voting in the 2022 general election. Your state or jurisdiction may call this absentee voting instead, but with few exceptions, all ballots that were sent or returned by mail should be recorded in Section C. You'll report the following data in this section. First, how many mail ballots were sent to voters? Second, how many mail ballots were sent to permanent mail voters? Third, how many Dropboxes did your jurisdiction have available for this election, and how many mail ballots were returned through these Dropboxes? Fourth, how many mail ballots were successfully cured by voters? Fifth, how many mail ballots were accepted and how many were rejected? And finally, what were the reasons these mail ballots were rejected? Some of the questions in this section are new for the 2022 EAVS, so the numbering of some questions has changed this year. There are 2 types of mail or absentee voting that should not be reported in Section C. First, mail ballots that were sent to voters covered by the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act, or UOCAVA, is reported in Section B of EAVS. Second, you shouldn't include any in-person voters, even if your state or jurisdiction uses the term in-person absentee voters, to refer to people who apply in person for an absentee ballot and cast that ballot in the election office in the same trip. These voters are categorized as in-person voters for the purposes of EAVS and should not be included in your responses in Section C. The first set of questions in Section C asks about mail ballots your office sent to voters for the 2022 general election. You'll report the total number of these ballots in C1A. In the remainder of C1, you'll divide the total into the listed categories. Ballots returned to the election office by voters, regardless of whether they were counted or rejected or whether they need to be cured, will be reported in C1B. Ballots returned as undeliverable will be reported in C1C. Ballots that were surrendered by the voter or incorrectly marked will be reported in C1D. Ballots that were surrendered so their recipient could vote in person with a provisional ballot will be reported in C1E. Mail ballots that were not returned will be reported in C1F. If some mail ballots do not fall into one of these categories, use C1G, H, or I to record them along with a description of the category. The numbers you report in C1B through C1I should add up to the total number of mail ballots in C1A. If you do not track data for one or more of these items, you can respond, "Data not available," to that item. Next, the survey asks about ballots sent to permanent mail voters. These are voters who automatically receive a mail ballot in an election without having to file any additional ballot application. You'll report this total in C2A. If your jurisdiction doesn't allow permanent mail voting status, you can respond, "Does not apply to this question." If your state or jurisdiction is conducting its general election entirely by mail in November 2022, meaning that all registered voters or all active registered voters will automatically receive a mail ballot, then you should not report regular mail ballots in C2A. The next set of questions asks about mail ballot Dropboxes. These questions are being asked for the first time in the 2022 EAVS. The EAVS defines Dropboxes as locked containers where voters may deliver their voted mail ballots for collection. These Dropboxes may be located indoors or outdoors, and if allowed by your state's law, a voter's authorized representative may be allowed to return the voter's ballot on their behalf. However, in order to be counted in EAVS, a Dropbox must be operated or controlled by election officials. Your state may use another term for drop boxes, such as secure ballot intake station or place of deposit. Mail ballot drop boxes are separate from ballot receptacles that are located at in-person polling places for voters to place their ballots in immediately after voting in person. The first data you will report about drop boxes is the total number that were used for the 2022 general election in C3A. In this question, each drop box should be counted only once, regardless of the number of voting days it was used for. For instance, if a drop box was available to collect mail ballots both before and on election day, it should be counted once in C3A. Next, you will report the number of drop boxes used on election day in C4 and the number of drop boxes used in early voting or before election day in C5. You will report these data in total in C4A and C5A by the number of drop boxes located at election offices in C4B and C5B, and the number located at non-election office sites in C4C and C5C. The data you report in C4B and C4C should sum to the total number of election day drop boxes that you report in C4A, and the data you report in C5B and C5C should sum to the total number of early voting drop boxes that you report in C5A. Please note, however, that the total number of election day and early voting drop boxes you report in C4A and C5A do not have to add up exactly to the total number of drop boxes you report in C3A. This is because some drop boxes may need to be reported in both C4 and C5 if they were used both before and on election day. The last data item you will report on drop boxes is the total number of mail ballots that were returned via Dropbox for this election in question C6A. In answering this question, keep in mind the definition of a Dropbox that was previously discussed. If your state or jurisdiction did not use drop boxes for the 2022 general election, then you may report does not apply to all items in question C3 through C6. You may also use does not apply if drop boxes cannot be used during one of the voting periods. For instance, if drop boxes are not available to voters on election day, then report does not apply in questions C4A through C4C. If you do not track the data to respond to an EAVS question, then report data not available as your response. For instance, if a drop box were available for voters to use in this election, but you did not track data on how many ballots were returned via Dropbox as opposed to another mode of submitting the ballot, then report data not available in C6A. The next question in EAVS is also new for 2022. This question asks about mail ballot curing in your jurisdiction. This refers to mail ballots that were initially rejected for an error or for not including required information or documentation, but were ultimately counted because the voter corrected the error or supplied the required information. Examples of circumstances when a state or jurisdiction may allow a voter to cure their ballot include when voter's signature on the ballot envelope was missing or did not match the voter's signature that was on file, or when voters are required to include a copy of their identification with their ballots, but a voter fails to do so. States that allow mail ballot curing will typically require voters to correct these errors within a few days of the election if the voter wishes for their ballot to be counted. As a reminder, any mail ballots that went through the cure process should be counted in the data that you report in item C1B. In question C7A, you will report the total number of mail ballots for the 2022 general election that were successfully cured, meaning the voters made the required corrections in time to have their ballot counted in this election. If your state or jurisdiction does not allow for ballot curing, you should instead report does not apply in this question. If ballot curing is allowed, but you do not track data on the number of ballots that were successfully cured, report data not available in C7A. The final set of questions in Section C focuses on mail ballots that voters return to the election office. In C8A, record the number of mail ballots that were processed and counted in the canvas of election results. Then, in question C9, record information about ballots that were rejected by the election office. You'll first record the total number in C9A, then you'll divide that total into the listed categories to indicate why the ballots were rejected. The reasons for rejection include the ballot being received after the deadline in C9B, the ballot lacking a voter signature in C9C, the ballot lacking a witness signature in C9D, the signature on the ballot not matching the signature on file in C9E, the ballot being returned in an unofficial envelope in C9F, the ballot being missing from an envelope in C9G, the ballot not being placed in a required secrecy envelope in C9H, multiple ballots being returned in one envelope in C9I, the envelope not being sealed in C9J, the envelope not having a required postmark in C9K, no resident address being present on the envelope in C9L, the ballot being from a deceased voter in C9M, the ballot being from a voter who already cast another ballot that was counted in C9N, the voter not providing required documentation or providing incomplete documentation in C9O, the voter who cast the ballot not being an eligible voter in C9P, and the ballot having no ballot application on record in C9Q. If the reason for the rejection doesn't appear in this question, you can use C9R, C9S, and C9T to record it. The numbers you report in C9B through C9T should add up to the total number of rejected mail ballots in C9A. If you do not check data for one or more of the listed items, you can respond, "Data not available," for that item. If instead your state or jurisdiction does not reject mail ballots for one of the listed reasons, then you can report, "Data does not apply" to that item. For instance, if voters in your state do not have to place their mail ballots in a secrecy envelope, then you would report "does not apply" in item C9H. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. We encourage you to carefully read through each section before answering any of the questions to ensure you're accurately reporting your data. A PDF of all EAVS questions is on the downloads page of the EAVS portal. We also encourage you to use the comment boxes for each question to provide us with additional information and context. This will help us analyze and report your data accurately. If you need additional assistance, please don't hesitate to contact us at eaves@foresmarshgroup.com. All emails sent to that address will be answered within 1 business day. Thank you, and we appreciate your time and contributions to the 2022 EAVS.